there were a lot of things that I found relatable and funny. That's why I did it. I mean, that's why I enjoyed doing it, because it was just, I came from a family that had a kind of a mean sense of humor.
For 11 seasons, one man made America laugh by playing someone who never seemed to be enjoying himself at all. Al Bundy complained about his job, his marriage, his children, his couch, and his life in general, and audiences howled every single time. But what if the joke everyone was laughing at was never really about Al Bundy's misery? What if it was about something far more universal, something Ed O'Neill has spent decades trying to help people understand? That question sits at the center of one of television's strangest legacies, and it starts not with a punchline, but with a shoe store in Chicago that never actually existed. When Married with Children premiered on Fox in April 1987, the network was barely 2 years old and desperate for an identity. Traditional family sitcoms like The Cosby Show and Family Ties dominated the ratings, presenting warm, functional households with life lessons wrapped neatly into every half hour. Fox needed something different, something that would make people notice a fourth network existed at all. Creators Michael G. Moy and Ron Levitt built a show that intentionally inverted every convention of the genre. Instead of a wise father, they gave viewers Al Bundy, a former high school football hero turned disillusioned shoe salesman who openly resented his family, his career, and his circumstances. It was satire built on discomfort, and Ed O'Neill, a relatively unknown stage and screen actor at the time, walked into the audition without any certainty that the part would even survive network scrutiny. O'Neill has spoken in various interviews over the years about how he approached the role not as a caricature but as a study in defeat. He has described drawing from real men he encountered growing up outside Youngstown, Ohio, working-class men who carried their frustrations quietly, whose body language told a story their mouths never fully expressed. That instinct shaped nearly everything about Al Bundy's physicality. The slumped shoulders, the exhausted sighs, the way he would collapse onto the couch as though gravity itself had given up on him. It wasn't written explicitly into the scripts. It was something O'Neill built through observation and instinct, and it became one of the most recognizable physical performances in sitcom history. Audiences remembered the jokes about AL's 4 touchdowns in a single high school game, or his running feud with neighbor Marcy Darcy, but few paused to consider that the comedy only worked because O'Neill grounded it in something believable. A man completely detached from reality isn't funny for very long. A man who feels achingly real, trapped in absurd circumstances, can sustain 11 seasons. That distinction, between satire and endorsement, became the through line of nearly everything O'Neill has said about the character in interviews conducted well after the show ended. He has repeatedly made the point that Al Bundy was never meant to be aspirational. The show wasn't suggesting that complaining about your wife or resenting your children was admirable. It was holding up an exaggerated mirror to frustration itself, the kind that grows out of unmet expectations and economic stagnation. Yet television audiences, especially in an era before recap culture and internet analysis, often took characters at face value. Some viewers embraced Al as a rebel against the saccharine sitcom families that dominated the airwaves, cheering for his crude commentary as a form of honesty. Others saw only vulgarity, dismissing the show entirely without engaging with its underlying critique of domestic disappointment. Both readings, in their own way, missed the deliberate tension the writers and O'Neill were building every week, comedy that came from watching a man sabotage his own happiness while insisting the world had done it to him. The show's early years were also shaped by genuine industry skepticism. Fox executives were not initially convinced that an unfamiliar actor could anchor a series this abrasive, and O'Neill has acknowledged that the first season carried real uncertainty about renewal. There was no guarantee that Married with Children would find an audience willing to sit with a family this openly dysfunctional. But the show found its footing by committing fully to its premise rather than softening it, and by season 2 it had become appointment viewing for audiences who wanted something rawer than what network television typically offered. Christina Applegate and David Faustino, playing daughter Kelly and son Bud, added their own layers to that dysfunction, while Katey Sagal's Peggy Bundy became just as central to the show's identity as O'Neill's Al, a housewife who spent money without earning it, avoided cooking almost entirely, and matched her husband's sarcasm insult for insult. Together, the ensemble created something closer to an exaggerated funhouse mirror of the American family than a realistic portrait, and it worked precisely because every performer understood they were playing broad symbols of dysfunction rather than literal role models. Behind that comedy, though, sat one of the most difficult chapters in the show's history, one that had nothing to do with scripts or ratings. In 1991, during the show's 6th season, Katey Sagal was pregnant in real life, and the writers built a storyline around it, having both Peggy and Amanda Bearse's character Marcy expecting children simultaneously. It seemed like a natural and even celebratory way to fold real life into the fiction. But that October, Sagal experienced a devastating loss. Her daughter, whom she and her husband named Ruby, was stillborn during an emergency delivery roughly 7 weeks before her due date, with no clear medical explanation given at the time. Sagal missed several episodes as she grieved, and production quietly and respectfully reworked the storyline. Rather than continuing with an on-screen birth that would have forced her to perform through profound personal pain, the writers resolved the pregnancy plot in the episode Al Bundy, Shoe Dick by revealing that the entire storyline had been one of AL's dreams. It was a practical solution for the show, but for the people making it, the loss left a mark that never fully appeared on screen. Sagal has spoken candidly about that period in interviews over the years, including a 2017 appearance on The View, where she described the confusion and self-blame that often accompanies stillbirth, and how she carried that grief while continuing to perform a character built entirely around comedic exaggeration. It stands as one of the clearest examples of the gap between what a sitcom presents to its audience and what its performers are actually enduring behind the scenes. A family trading jokes on camera while carrying real sorrow just out of frame. As Married with Children aged and eventually ended its run in 1997 after 262 episodes, O'Neill faced a challenge familiar to many actors who become inseparable from an iconic role. For years, casting conversations circled back to Al Bundy regardless of the part being offered, and O'Neill has spoken about the difficulty of being seen as anything other than the sarcastic, downtrodden father who defined an entire era of Fox comedy. That changed meaningfully in 2009, when O'Neill was cast as Jay Pritchett in ABC's Modern Family. The role gave him a chance to inhabit a father figure built from almost the opposite emotional material, successful rather than defeated, guarded but ultimately affectionate, capable of expressing love even when he struggled to say it directly. O'Neill has discussed in multiple interviews how playing Jay allowed him to access a warmth that Al Bundy was never permitted to show, and how the contrast between the two characters helped him, and audiences, reconsider what Al Bundy had actually represented all along. Jay's vulnerability threw AL's guardedness into sharper relief, revealing just how emotionally closed off the earlier character had been by design. That reconsideration has only deepened as Married, with Children found new life on streaming platforms, introducing the Bundys to viewers who never experienced Fox's early scrappy years firsthand. O'Neill has noted the shift in how younger audiences respond to the show, often reading Al through a very different cultural lens than the one that existed in 1987. Some newer viewers interpret him as a tragicomic figure, a man crushed by economic stagnation and unmet ambition, coping through cruelty and sarcasm rather than expressing real vulnerability. Others view certain jokes as products of a less careful television era, material that reflects attitudes networks would hesitate to greenlight today. O'Neill himself has acknowledged in interviews that some content from the show's original run would likely face far more scrutiny if produced now, a reflection of how dramatically television standards and audience expectations have shifted over nearly 4 decades. He has also maintained consistently that the character was never intended as a role model, that the joke was always on Al, not with him, even when audiences occasionally missed that distinction and celebrated his bitterness rather than recognizing it as satire. What emerges across O'Neill's various reflections on the role isn't regret, exactly, and it isn't simple pride either. It's something closer to a considered understanding of how a character can outgrow the intentions of everyone who created him. Al Bundy began as a satire of frustrated masculinity, built from real observations of working-class disappointment, performed with a physical precision that most viewers never consciously noticed even as it shaped every laugh. He became, over 11 seasons and decades of syndication, something larger and more contested than his creators likely imagined, a character audiences still argue about, still reinterpret, still project their own experiences onto. Behind that character stood real people carrying real burdens, from the physical toll of live studio audience tapings to the private grief that Katey Sagal endured while still delivering her lines each week. The laughter the show generated was genuine, but it was never the whole story. Ed O'Neill's own journey away from and eventually back toward peace with the role suggests that some characters take years, sometimes decades, to fully understand, not because the performance changes, but because the audience, and the actor himself, finally catch up to what was quietly there all along.